Thanks for tuning in to the Medevac podcast, powered by the Robert Irvine Foundation, whose mission is to support and strengthen the physical and mental well-being of our nation's heroes and their families. I'm one of your hosts, David Reed.
And I'm your other host, Christian Myers. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Medevac podcast. If you're new here, there's a price for the show. You have to share it with a friend or family member if you get something out of today's episode. And if you're returning here, well, you know the drill. Go leave a review, interact with the content somehow, because we would do the same for you. Our guest today is Amanda Martinez. She is a SARM currently in the Air Force, currently retiring, actually, so you're on your terminal leave.
I am.
And she is also the veteran coordinator for the PTSD Foundation. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's rewind it back to kind of what inspired you to join the military before we dive into your 20-year career.
Okay. Well, if I'm being 100% honest, my mom and I didn't get along very much when I was a kid.
Okay.
So I just wanted to get away from home. I had an uncle in the Marine Corps. I had an uncle in the Army. Both of them told me, do not join the Marine Corps, do not join the Army.
Smart.
Fair enough. Yeah.
That's what I tell people now, and I was in the Army.
Yeah. So they both told me, pick the Navy or pick the Air Force. So did my research on the Navy. I didn't really want to spend 6 months on a ship. So I picked the Air Force. My recruiter was amazing. Still friends with her today. She was a really big part of why I ended up joining. I had a lot of issues with my mom my last couple years living at home as a teenager, and she was always there. Like, my mom was old school. My mom's first generation American.
Okay.
So, when my uncle joined the Marine Corps, he depended on the Marine Corps to help him with things. So my mom would be like, call your recruiter if you want to do that. Call your recruiter. Tell her to come pick you up. And my recruiter would come and get me. And she would take me to like a high school football game or something like that because my mom just was not okay with me doing things at the time. So, she gave me my options. I actually failed the ASVAB the first time I took it because I was just so nervous and didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And my recruiter was like, it's fine. You can retake it. Once you retake it, you're going to pass. Like, we've done practice exams. So passed it, got a couple of job choices, and the two things that I said, I was like, I want to be inside and I want to sit at a desk. I don't want to be turning wrenches. Yeah. I don't want to be out in the hot weather.
Definitely don't want to be shot at.
No, not at all. So I got some good job choices, and then I ended up picking aviation resource management, and I did that my entire career except for I had a 1-year stint running the resilience program.
Oh, okay.
And that was probably my best year in the Air Force.
Best.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what a SARM does exactly? I'm familiar, obviously, being from a flying unit.
Yeah.
But,
so we have the SARM and the HARM. The HARM is the Host Aviation Resource Management Office, and in that office we do everything admin-wise. So pay actions, rank changes, anything that has to do with the personnel information, that's what that office is doing. So jump pay, flight pay, all those kinds of things.
The important stuff, to be honest.
Yeah, it really is.
This is an interesting subject that we always talk about too, is kind of people decredit other branches and talk about, oh, my job was the most important in the military. And it's jobs like these that make sure that everybody else could function properly and do their jobs.
For sure.
And I'm sure you felt that while you were in there.
Yeah, I didn't realize it for quite some time. It wasn't until I started supervising other people where you had to kind of explain why our job was so important.
Yeah.
So, obviously very important in the HARM. Most of the HARM offices that I worked in had over 1,100 records. So people all over the place that were dealing with all their pay actions and other kinds of things. We also dealt with disqualifications, requalifications. So if people had legal actions and stuff like that, we had to deal with that as well. And those were like few and far between. So when they came up, it was very difficult to figure out how to maneuver those things. And then in the SARM, that's down in the squadron. In most fighter squadrons, our job is the only enlisted in the squadron. So I was with A-10s for about 7 years, and I was the highest ranking enlisted person assigned to the unit as a staff sergeant. So in the SARM, we do flight authorizations. So we check their go-no-goes, make sure they're current and qualified to fly or jump. And then we build their flight authorization, where they're flying to and from, and if they're coming back, what they're going to do in between. And then when they come back, we log all of their stuff that they did. So any training or real world operations, all of that is tracked. And so we get that into a system, and then we audit everything to make sure that things are correct. So when you're in the squadron, it's a lot more fast paced. And it's a little scary when some people don't realize how important it is. We used to have airmen that we'd have run out to the flight line to go have a pilot sign the flight authorization because they let them leave without stopping them to say, hey, sir, you need to sign this. So there were times where they were running out there and had no clue why they were running out there. And I'm like, if this plane crashes, like, this is on you. This pilot didn't sign this. Like, how are we supposed to know? Like, he didn't agree to take this plane, and now it's gone.
Yeah, he stole the airplane.
Yeah, basically. So it was really important to kind of get people that were new to understand how much of a role we actually had within the squadron.
It benefits the flight crew and the pilots specifically, right?
Yeah.
If they have their mind on some I guess extraneous issue like paperwork or pay issue, then they're not focused on flying an aircraft, right? If they're thinking about, well, I haven't gotten paid in 6 weeks. How's my wife and my kids who are back home going to eat this week? They're not focused on flying, which it could lead to a dangerous position.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And you probably saw quite a change over since 2004, right?
Yep.
Is when you enlisted.
2004.
So 2004, we're kind of just getting into the tempo of world operations at this point. So what was that like in the beginning, and that has it advanced over the years?
I would say, like, in the beginning, my first unit, I was with the Special Ops unit. So I was stationed in Japan. I was with the 17th Special Operations Squadron. So it was very different learning what they did and how they participated in real world operations, because it was very different than the traditional Air Force. So kind of learning that, and then transitioning into the fighter world and back to the heavies, you have to learn about each specific aircraft and what they do and what the air crew do, because if you don't know what they're doing, then you can't really like verify what they're doing in the aircraft. So when I first went to A-10s, I remember just being so confused, because I'm like, how do I know that these pilots did this while they were flying? And they're like, you just have to trust them. I'm like, what? I don't trust air crew. Like, they're air crew. Air crew just does whatever they want. So from there, coming all the way till now, like, our systems have obviously changed. In the beginning, we were hand jamming all the stuff. And now we have all these systems that they're able to kind of do everything on a computer or push it through an iPad. The systems are obviously much better. So it makes me a little worried, because they might transition or phase us out at some point. But I feel like the job is so important. There has to be somebody there that actually goes through their things. But there's so much that has changed, and they change systems so frequently that it's like, once you learn a new system, they have another system coming out.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most frustrating part for us, was like, you're in one unit for 4 years and you use this system, and then you go to another unit and they use a totally different system. And you're like, I don't want to touch this. I don't know what to do with this system. So yeah, there's just a lot of new, more, I guess, modern technology now compared to when I first joined. So yeah.
Which has made the job easier. It has its pros and cons,
Yes,
I'm sure,
yes,
right?
for
New
sure.
systems, learning that those new systems
Because
are
aircrew doesn't want to do anything. Like, they want to fly or jump.
Yeah, and that
So-
kind of begs the next question I have is, let's talk about the temperament. I mean, you're dealing with pilots who are already overly sensitive. No offense to anyone out there. But so in dealing with a staff, we'll call it a staff tech for you.
Yeah.
How is their attitude most of the time? Because I know when paperwork goes wrong, people are pointing fingers.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I feel like most air crew kind of respected us as long as we knew what we were doing. I think that when you don't know what you're doing, they kind of just don't care and don't listen to you and just do whatever they want. But for the most part, I feel like the air crew that I worked with, they were great. If we had a onesie twosie every now and then that wouldn't fill out their paperwork, usually one of the colonels would get in their butts and be like, you need to get this done because they can't go home until you do these. But I can remember when I was stationed in Korea, we had a lieutenant or a captain, and he was like, I don't have time to fill that out. Like, I have to go debrief. Like, my debrief is more important. And I was just like, oh, okay. I was a baby airman. I didn't know what to do. And the staff sergeant was like, I'll handle it. And she went and told the colonel, and he came back and he was like, if he comes back and doesn't fill out his paperwork again, let me know. So like, I was like, oh, wow. Okay. This is important. Like these papers are important. It's not just a piece of paper that we're throwing to the side. Like we're actually tracking their flying hours, on a regular basis. And back then, we didn't have a system to calculate everything. We had to do it all on our own. So if it didn't get calculated by us, then it would just be missing.
Yeah.
And then years later in the HARM office is when you see people coming in and looking at their flight records and realizing there's stuff that's missing. So then they have to go back and submit a form to get those hours back in their records.
That's a big deal for aviators, and
Yeah.
especially in deployments. And
Yeah. Air medals.
Yeah, with air medals, or if you break it down, if you take it a step further, right, you're utilizing the same paperwork to log for maintenance hours as you are for your flight hours.
Right.
So if you log one and the other, incorrectly, then 6 months later down the line when the numbers don't add up, now you guys are forced to go in, do an audit,
Go back and pull all the paperwork.
verify.
Yeah. So not only do we deal with the air crew, we also deal with maintenance. So we would reconcile daily hours with maintenance to make sure things were properly done.
Yeah.
And then we'd have a monthly meeting where we would sit down and go through line by line to make sure all the numbers were added up properly. So those numbers obviously count for flying hours, and those flying hours cost money.
Yes.
So
a lot of money.
yeah, so it was a really important thing to have to deal with. So, and we also have HARM SARM, and then we have like a current ops office that we would do range scheduling, and we would do flying hour reconciliation. So there's a couple little different entities that we are able to work in as far as SARM and other small shops that we would have. So yeah.
It's all important work. And
Yeah,
it needs
for
to be
sure.
done. I know pilots with their hours, it's all about the hours.
Yep.
So you got to have them logged. Now, your time in Korea, what were you doing out there? Same thing?
Yeah, I was with
A-10s?
F-16s.
Oh, F-16s
Yep,
at the time.
F-16s. I was at Kunsan.
Okay.
Yep.
So you got to see a broad range of
I did.
aircraft across
Yeah.
the board, probably up close and personal with a
Yeah.
lot of them. The A-10 is an incredible beast. And did you ever see it in action as well? And
Yeah, so we actually, the unit I was with, we deployed out to Korea in 2011. We were actually supposed to go to Afghanistan, and 2 weeks before we left, our commander was like, oh, we're diverted. And I was like, okay, where are we going? He's like, we're going to Osan. And I'm like, what? I'm like, why are we going to Korea? So there was a lot of stuff going on at that point in time.
What did you want?
I would have loved to go to Afghanistan. So my whole 20 years, I never went out there. So I would have loved that. But the mission that we did in Korea was also, a really good mission. But we got to see them fly really close when we were there in Korea, because they did a lot of training missions, obviously, to support in case something happened. So that was pretty cool. They'd take us out to the range, and we get to watch them do all their stuff out there.
The gun runs and stuff?
Yeah.
Bad when
Yeah.
they're coming in.
Oh yeah, one of the most impressive things you'll ever see in your life. A-10 live fire.
Yeah. I miss the whistle sound.
Yeah.
Of just hearing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just magnificently terrifying
Yeah.
things, for
So you-
sure.
So you bounced around between a few different squadrons, you said. So you were between special operations, fighter, attack, heavies.
Yep.
So can you walk us through your career a little bit? Where did you
Okay.
bounce around from and to, and
Okay.
who did you like working with the best?
So
Why is it helicopters?
I was with the 17th SOS at Kadena from 2004 to 2006. And then I was in the 80th Fighter Squadron at Kunsan for a year, so F-16s. Then I went to Ramstein, where I was with, I'm trying to think, the 37th Airlift Squadron.
So you had 3 overseas locations,
3 overseas.
back to back.
So yeah, so that's how they got me, right? So
I don't feel bad for you.
I only enlisted for 4 years, and I went straight to Kadena, and I was terrified. I was 18, didn't know what I was doing. Got to Japan, loved it. Probably my favorite assignment just because it was by the beach. So loved being out in the water. Then I got my Kunsan assignment, and that's where they dangled the carrot, right? It's like, oh, if you want another overseas assignment, you have to extend your enlistment. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. So I extended out so I could take my Germany assignment. Went to Germany, and while I was in Germany, I decided to re-enlist. They had a bonus at the time for our job.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, I'm going to hit this bonus.
Yeah.
Another little carrot dangled. So I took that. And then I did a BOP back to the States. So basic preference back to the States. And I got stationed at Davis-Monthan, which is where I spent the 7 years with A-10s.
Okay.
So I went from the operational unit to the HARM, to the current ops shop, to the 357th, which was the training unit. So we had all the students coming in straight out of pilot training. So that was kind of cool to kind of learn, like, oh, these lieutenants are brand new officers. Like, they don't know how to fill out their paperwork. They have no idea what they're doing. So we're basically in charge of showing them what to do.
Yeah.
So we had a ton of classes come through. Lots of lieutenants where I feel like we kind of taught them how to be a good aircrew member. You know,
Sure.
It's like, hey, you have to fill these forms out.
Yeah.
Please don't forget. Like,
Be
take
responsible.
care of us, and we'll take care of you.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. So being able to go from the operational to the training side was pretty cool to kind of see the difference. But I was there so long that when I had my last unit, which was the HARM office, I was seeing the captains and majors coming back because they would come in and go to the operational unit, leave, and then they'd come back to be instructors. So they'd come back to be an instructor, and they're like, "You're still here." I'm like, "I'm still here. I'm never leaving."
Stuck in Tucson.
So yeah, so I finally got an assignment out of nowhere, and then I got stationed at Mildenhall in
nice.
England, and that's where I went back to special operations. I worked in the JOC for 2 years there, in the, I think it was scheduling. So we did like, we would call the defense attaché offices to get approval to go in and out of different countries. So that I did that for 2 years, but working inside of a vault for 2 years in England was rough. So not a lot of sunlight,
Yeah.
in a vault with no communication to anybody else the whole time you're in there. But really learned a lot more about like what special ops does,
Yeah.
what their missions were, obviously in the vault. So a lot of things that I couldn't talk about. So that was a little difficult because you're in the vault all day and then you get home and it's just like, hey, you can't talk about anything.
Yeah.
It's just like,
What'd you do today?
what did you see? You can't talk about
Yeah.
it. So I spent 2 years in the JOC, and then I got moved over to the Special Tactics Unit. So I got to work with the jumpers, so with the PJs and combat controllers. That was a challenge. That was a very big challenge for me.
And why was it a challenge for you?
I was going through a lot at the time. So I've been married and divorced twice. So I was going through my second divorce. And literally the week that I moved into that unit was the week that my ex-husband said, like, I'm filing for divorce. So I came in with the problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, you guys know, like, you work in a special tactics unit, like, they're worried about the mission and training. They don't care about your personal life. So I really struggled in that unit.
Just because that personal
Yes.
life was bleeding over
Yeah.
into this service.
And I think also, like, they're very alpha. And I feel like sometimes I can be very alpha. Like, I'm not scared of anything really. And I'm very outspoken. So I feel like when you're in those units, you're like in or you're out. So when I came in, I kind of had issues. Nobody knew me prior to that. So I came in, had issues, and they were just like, oh my God, she's a problem.
I see.
Yeah.
See.
conflicting personalities
Yeah.
with big personalities,
Yes.
and everyone's the
Yes.
most important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah.
We see that. We see it every once in a while. But also, from a unit cohesion standpoint, I would say that that's the entirely wrong way to go about things, right?
Yeah.
If somebody's dealing with something personal and it's bleeding over
Yeah.
onto the professional side, well, you need to address that. You need to, help your airmen and help
Right.
your people through, through those
Yeah.
issues. Ultimately.
Yeah.
What year was that?
That was 2019.
Yeah.
So
It's a problem.
COVID, and it's COVID, right? So it's in the middle of
Yeah.
COVID. I went through a complete identity change at that moment.
Yeah.
I had been helping my ex-husband raise his son. His son was 5 when I met them, and he was almost 13 when we split.
Oh, yeah.
So, and we had him full time, almost majority of the 8 years that we were together. So I was a mom primarily for all of those years. Like that was who I was. And then I go into a new unit and I'm like, I don't know who I am. Like I've lost a child, I've lost a husband, and they were kind of like, we've all been through divorces, we've all lost children, and like
Rub dirt on it.
yeah, like and that's honestly that's kind of how I was raised. My mom was never really like oh, come here, let me hug you, Now she is. But when we were kids, it was like, suck it up. Like,
Yeah.
don't cry. You're going to be all right.
And I'm sure that led into you getting into the mental health realm as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
There's 2 types of people. They become their mother who doesn't support or care, or, they use that as
Yeah.
an instrument to push themselves forward
sure.
and to help out with that. So the military service, 2019, we're seeing some influx of mental health programs
Yep.
within it, but it's still
Well,
going
and the
through some
unit that I
issues.
was in, we, special tactics, right? So, we had all of those entities embedded into our unit. So we had a mental health provider, we had a physician, we had a physical therapist. So it was good because I could go like, hey, I'm going to go see, the mental health doc, and I'd go and do that. But then if I was there too long, then it would be like, well, you were gone for 3 hours. And I'm like, what's that medical appointment? Sorry.
Taking care of myself.
But it was, I was gone too long or whatever. So once COVID became a thing, that was even harder because it was like 1 week in the office, 1 week out of the office. So really, honestly, we didn't see anyone. And during that time, my drinking kind of ramped up.
Sure.
So when I was at home for a whole week, all I did was drink.
You're
And
by
then when I
yourself,
would,
right?
I was by myself.
Yeah.
And when I'd get home from work, I would drink.
So you're in a more special operations unit still. Can't really talk about it. Go
Yeah.
home. Can't talk to anyone.
Yeah.
And you have the bottle of booze that's
Yep.
helping you out. I mean,
Yep.
commonality across the board.
Yeah.
It's just the perfect storm
Yep.
of things that are going on.
Yep.
And COVID is thrown into the middle of it. So you're dealing with that whole situation of isolation during this time as well.
Yeah.
So how was that experience for you? I'm very curious to those who are active duty,
Yeah.
what that looked like.
I mean, it was rough, right? So I was overseas, so the restrictions were even more strict.
Yes.
We couldn't even have another person in our vehicle. And at some point, they said, okay, you can have one other household as your support circle. So during that time, I actually met a friend and I became really good friends with his family. And his family ended up becoming my support circle. They had 2 daughters. One of them was same age as my stepson. So that kind of helped a little bit.
Sure.
But when I wasn't with them, then I was back to drinking. So it was rough.
Remember when they tried to close the liquor stores?
Yes. Yes.
And then they opened them right back up.
Oh man. And that's honestly, they were doing that overseas as well. Like on base, they were like, well, we're going to have to stop doing this. And I was like, what else are we supposed to do?
I mean, you'd have full blown riots.
Yeah.
I remember like people talking about that. They're like,
Yeah.
I'll burn this whole city down if I don't have a shot of vodka.
yeah, I don't think it would have went well,
Probably
especially
not.
like at the base we were at. Like it was such a small like community,
Tiny.
that the stuff went fast.
Yeah.
During COVID, like the alcohol was gone, and it was like when are they going to get some strawberries in? Like that's all I want to drink now.
That's funny. So, not to take it back to a somber note, but I mean, you're part of the kind of entrenched in a vicious cycle that a lot of people unfortunately found themselves in that isolated. Partly working from home, partly in the office, but for the most part, you're isolated. You don't have many people to talk to. Turn to drinking, which again, a lot of people did during COVID. When did you realize that it started to become a problem for you? Was there like a big event, or was it just gradually?
It's usually military service. They're like, hey, Sarn, I got to tell
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So I will say throughout the years, you go through and you do your PHA, right? And they ask you how many drinks you've had in a month or whatever.
Oh, you were honest.
So if you're honest, right? If you're honest, they basically tell you like, don't be honest, change your paperwork because now we're going to have to send you to this program. Or you just don't be honest and you fly through the system, you go. So I actually had quit drinking on my own multiple times throughout the time I was in the military. I wouldn't drink for 9 months, and then I'd start drinking again, wouldn't drink for 3 months. So, my ex-husband and I, we both drank a lot, and I was always the problem. So it was like, you were too drunk, you don't remember this, da 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 da. And everybody else would be like, oh, it's fine. This happens to us all the time. Like, I don't remember things
He used
ever.
it as ammo.
Yeah. So part of me was like, I do have a problem. And then the other part of me was like, well, everybody in the Air Force says they all do this. They all get drunk. They
Everybody
all
else
have
does it.
blackouts, right?
And
So
that's very true as well. I mean, I believed just in my soul that it wasn't a problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
You believe it's
Yeah. It's what you
you're
see
like,
every day.
Who doesn't have 4 to 6 drinks
On a
per,
Tuesday.
per hour?
Yeah.
On a Tuesday.
For
This
sure.
is normal. I'm
You're like,
relaxing.
I'm not even drunk until
Yeah.
I hit 7 shots. So like, what the heck?
Seriously.
Yeah,
It's what you
so-
see all the time. So it's normal.
Normalizes it.
So
yeah.
normal. So I was in England. I got my last assignment was back to Germany. So
You lucky duck.
I know. So 13 of my 20 I spent
I
overseas.
mean,
wow.
they nabbed you in with that every time though, is you went from
Yep.
4 years to 20.
Yep.
They got
Yep.
you.
They got me
Do you
every
speak
single
German?
time. I can understand it. I can read it. I am very scared to speak it. I have very, very close German friends.
We're
That
always judging.
they would watch me on Duolingo, and so it would say the word, and then I would say it out loud, and they'd all kind of chuckle. I'm like, okay, let me practice my German, guys. So I had a really good German family.
Okay.
So when I moved over to Germany, August of 2021, September of 2021, which was the Afghanistan withdrawal. So I got to a new base in the middle of all that. Pretty chaotic when I first got there.
And what base were you at?
I was at Mildenhall, and then I went to Ramstein.
Okay, Ramstein.
Yep.
And they were bringing in a lot of people and
Yeah, the whole flight line was cleared. There
Yeah.
were no planes.
tents everywhere, right?
Tents.
Yeah.
It was tent city everywhere. I remember the first day I got there, driving to work, I had to drive across the flight line to get to my office. And there were fences on both sides where I was driving, and there was just kids just standing there with their hands through the fence. So that was a whole experience in itself.
I mean, that probably had to be pretty scarring.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then, they were still kind of figuring out who people were.
Yeah.
So there were some people there that needed to not be there. So people that would come in with weapons that would have to get pushed over to a different side or to a different area. So that was kind of scary as well.
Yeah.
And really the security was the army. Like the army came from everywhere in Germany and in Europe, I'm guessing. And they were the security for Tent City.
Yeah.
So just mass chaos.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I got there, it wasn't as bad as it had been. My airmen had to deal with a lot of stuff.
Sure.
They were picking up fecal matter off the floor
Yeah.
because people were just going wherever.
Yeah.
And so I spent my time in the mom and baby area while I was there. So I helped with milk, diapers, wipes, clothes, that kind of stuff the whole time I was there. And that was something different as well. Like there were babies that had like 7 outfits on because they didn't want to share the clothes because they didn't know if they were going to get more clothes for their baby. And it was hot.
Yeah.
There was no AC. So, you know, this baby's screaming and crying and you're like ripping clothes off the baby to change the diaper. And you're realizing like this person has kept all these clothes because they don't know if they're going to get anything else.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of information at
No.
all coming from chain of command at this point.
No.
Kind of in the dark, just taking up duty assignments that
Yep.
you never thought you were going to do.
Correct.
Curious to what you did here that was going on. What were you briefed? What's coming in? The pilot's probably a little friendly with you at this point.
Yeah. I mean, really, we had no information. When I got there, I was working in the harm office. So I got there as a master sergeant. So I was an E7. I know I'm retiring as an E6, so we'll get there. But I was a master sergeant. I had put on E7 during COVID. So I didn't have a lot of mentorship as far as like, you're a senior NCO, these are the things you need to do. I got kind of thrown into a position at my new base with a bunch of people to supervise, and I was not prepared. I was told the day before I got there, hey, you're no longer going to the 37th, which is where I was going to go initially. You're now going here, and I leave in 2 weeks, so we have 2 weeks to do a turnover. Yeah, and it was turnover, so, you know, someone's PCSing out, I'm PCSing in. There's COVID still a thing, and it's the Afghan withdrawal. So it's a lot of moving pieces. You don't really know where your airmen are. You're hoping they're going to what they're supposed to be doing. So it was a lot of chaos. And really, I literally in-processed and then would go into the office, check on everybody, make sure everybody was alive, and then go and do the, you know, my pod area for 6 to 8 to 10 hours, depending on what they needed. So there wasn't really anything until maybe end of September was when they started saying, okay, you know, we're going to start giving everybody vaccinations and we're going to start pushing people to the States. And that was chaotic as well.
People are refusing at this
Yes.
point.
Yep.
What was your stance?
I don't know. I feel like I saw a lot when the Afghan withdrawal first started. I was still in England and I was still with Special Tactics. So a lot of those guys still had a lot of communication with translators, calling them, trying to get help. So I got to kind of see, you know, the personal side of some of those special operations guys dealing with people that they became close with for the times they were in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So for me, I just wanted people to be safe, you know, like people left with a bag and that's it. They don't know what's happening. And I think even when they were leaving, they still weren't sure like what was happening. You know, they were, hey, you're going to take these vaccinations and we're taking you to America.
The fear that is instilled in them while they're jumping onto these planes, just as it takes off and it flies an hour or two, now it's sinking in that their whole life has just been uplifted or uprooted, if you will. So then there's a whole different problem that they're
and
facing.
I think they thought they were just going to go to America and like, okay, good luck.
Here's the door.
And it wasn't like that. They went into different bases where they had to get approval to get jobs and those kinds of things. And you have people that are doctors and scientists and all these, you know, great jobs in Afghanistan. And now
getting assigned sanitation.
Right.
And
right. So, you know, I kind of felt like I wouldn't know what to do if it was me. Like if I'd gone through all this schooling and then you're kind of just get on this plane, we'll tell you where you're going when you get there, you know, like.
Yeah, and the aftermath, what's going on in the country after we leave is brutal all on its own.
Yeah.
I mean, you have hit lists that are going out, so a lot of those doctors are getting targeted as well, and they're not seeing that. There's no information being shared of like, hey, maybe, you know, you're not going to be happy for the next 8 months, but at least you're not
Right.
back in Afghanistan,
For
where
sure.
they're going to come at you. Pretty brutal times. So the vaccine is kind of what I was going with too. During this time, they're forcing vaccines on soldiers as well.
Yep.
And my question being was like, what's your thought on that?
Well, I feel like
It's
at
like,
this
just
point,
stick me so I
yeah,
can
it's like I
get-
feel like at this point, like
I got 3 years left.
yeah, like I mean,
Yeah.
they were kicking people out
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
they weren't taking it. So it was like, well, I either take this vaccination or the last 17 years are for nothing.
For nothing.
You know,
Throw it
and
away.
so I went ahead and did it. I didn't get COVID until after I got my booster. So
Surprise.
Surprising.
Safe and effective.
Yep, got COVID right after I had my booster, and so that was honestly right after everybody left. So Tent City got torn down. That was like September, October, and then I got COVID in January, and then I was quarantined for 14 days because in Germany it was 14 days, and so I was stuck in the house. I didn't feel sick. So
Were you drinking?
I was drinking. I was drinking. My friends and I had luckily made a really good group of girlfriends when I had first gotten to Germany. And so we would FaceTime. And because a lot of us were quarantined at the same time because we were all exposed.
Okay.
So we had taken a trip together to Prague for New Year's. And we got back literally within 3 days. I had COVID and I think one other person got COVID. So we all had to quarantine.
Sure.
So I spent FaceTimes and waking up like, oh, did we FaceTime last night? Like, that's weird.
Not a problem.
I don't have to go in today.
So yeah, so that was in January. So in February, I actually
Here it is.
here it
Here's
is.
the story.
February of 22. I was very stressed out with, I guess, first not dealing with any of my emotions. Secondly, the new job. We had airmen that were not just easily abiding airmen. Like they always had questions. It was never like, oh, we're gonna do this, or it's like, hey, you have to quarantine, and then find out they're out. They got into a car accident and they're supposed to be in their dorm. So we had all these things that were just kind of like stressing me out more and more. And we had a new NCO come in. So I took her out for the day to go look for apartments. Around 1 o'clock, we stopped to get lunch. And I had 3 drinks. I had a glass of wine, a margarita, and a Long Island.
You just mixed them all together, didn't you?
I was just having a moment.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's lunch.
I don't know what
I'm
I
not
was
quite
thinking.
sure which one I want, so I'll take all
Let's
three.
take all of them.
They all sound good.
And I specifically remember, you know, throughout my career, people have said, right, if you need a mental health day, let us know. We'll give you a day. Well, that day in particular, like, we're going to have a mental health day after 12 o'clock. And so we started drinking. I didn't leave the restaurant right away. I did drive home a couple hours later. So like 3 or 4 hours later, I drove home. Definitely should not have driven home. When I got home, I knew I was tipsy and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But at 6:30, I decided that I needed to go pick up my dog from doggy daycare. And I made it about 7 minutes before. So I crashed my car. I had a brand new Mini Cooper that I had just bought. I only had it for 4 months. My troop was with me. That wasn't good either. And I was not very coherent. Like, I still only remember bits and pieces from that night. When I got into the accident, I still didn't even realize that we had crashed. Like, I put my car in reverse and I heard it go, like, oh. And I was like, get out. Like, that's when it hit me. Like, oh my God, we got in a car accident. We need to get out. So at that moment, I knew I'm done. Especially being an E7 senior NCO,
Yeah.
I knew it was not a good look for me. So
Was everybody okay?
yeah, luckily everybody's okay.
And good thing it was on the way, not when your dog was in the car.
Yes. But, looking back, obviously hindsight is 2020. Like, he stayed the night there anyway, so I could have just left him there. I could have called. I just wasn't thinking, obviously, right? So, that accident was what made me go into the ADAP program, which is get treatment for alcohol. When I first went in, they diagnosed me with mild severity, and I was very. I wanted to be educated. So I paid attention in the classes. I talked in the groups. I learned a lot about drinking, and, there's criteria. And if you meet certain criteria, then you have a problem.
Sure.
My biological dad is a recovering alcoholic. So that there, on my mom's side of the family, I have quite a few uncles that drink a lot. But like I said, I grew up around that. So like to me, drinking was normal. Like, then you join the military and everything you do, celebration or not, drinking is usually involved. So, that's when I kind of realized maybe I do have a problem. And I didn't drink for 5 months. And then when I started drinking again, when I first started drinking again, I was like, I'm going to be a responsible drinker. I made a responsible drinking plan. And the first wine fest that I went to, I was
You were
drunk.
like, this rule is
Like, when you go out and you're with people, honestly, you're with people that outrank you, right? Like you're running into all kinds of people.
Sure.
And, in Germany, you buy a bottle of wine at a wine fest and it's like, oh, your glass is empty. Let me fill it up.
Yeah.
And so the next morning I woke up and I was like, I don't even remember how I got here. My sunglasses are missing. Like, just these little things. And I'm like, I don't know what happened yesterday.
Yeah, and any blackout situation is you just feel terrible.
Horrible. Yeah. I think I stayed
Even if you weren't an asshole,
Yeah.
you still feel like an
honestly.
asshole.
And I think I stayed in the house for 2 days before I left because it was like a Friday night. So I didn't leave Saturday, didn't leave Sunday. And I didn't know what to do or what to say to my friends. My friends were like, hey, it's fine. It's not a big deal. So I continued to drink. But then for whatever reason, in June of last year, I had a night where I blacked out, and my plan was to have one drink. I took a beer from my house with a friend of mine, and we walked down to a festival. And when I woke up in the morning, all of my lights were on, and I didn't remember how I got home. I knew I walked because that was the plan, but my plan was to have one beer. And when I woke up, I was like, I don't even know how many drinks I had last night.
So maybe the moral of the story is avoid festivals at all costs.
Because that's where it was,
It's
right?
the festivals.
Yeah, honestly. For me, I think it was once I started, I wasn't going to stop.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
Have to have a drink in the hand.
Some people
Yeah.
just, the self-control is
Yeah.
not out there. And when you have one drink that, that
and the peer pressure, like,
and that's that is a real thing.
real thing.
I mean, you do have someone that's a little higher ranking than you. Obviously you have to be good with them.
yeah,
So they're like, stop being a baby. And you're like, all right, I'm going to put on my big girl pants and
Yep.
get this done.
yep,
And then you wake up and
yeah,
sunglasses.
yeah, yeah. So that was
And
when
this
I,
is obviously, like, is this the moment that
yeah, this was it.
So
When
you
I
got
woke
away
up,
with a crash.
well, okay, no, I didn't get away with it.
Okay.
So I lost a stripe. So my
Yeah.
commander did my punishment in under 30 days to try to be lenient with me.
Sure.
But they took my stripes. So then I went from an E7 to an E6, but that was it. I didn't get any like additional forfeiture of pay, nothing else. It was like, we're going to take your stripe and in 30 days, like, you just move on.
Sure.
And so
That's heartbreaking.
it was horrible.
Oh, yeah.
I was miserable. I don't think I ate for 2 weeks.
Imagine.
Every time I went somewhere, I felt like I had this huge sign over my head that said, like, this idiot got a DUI. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't want to see anyone. And nobody knew, unless I said something.
Sure.
But then I got pulled out of the unit. I was told that I couldn't work there until my admin actions were done. So they sent me to a different unit that I worked for about 6 or 8 weeks. And when it was time for me to go back to the unit, I couldn't go back to the unit. I'm not sure why I couldn't go back to the unit, and no other unit wanted me. So not only was I dealing with, getting in trouble, losing a stripe, then it was like, no unit wants you because you messed up.
Yeah.
And
So
I
no
knew
support
that was what
system.
it was, right? Like, I
Yeah.
talked to a chief of mine and I said, Chief, can you just be honest with me and tell me, like, they don't want me because I got in trouble. And now they think I'm a problem. And she's like, that's 100% what it is. I was like, thank you for being honest with me. But it was like, hey, you're going to go to this unit. And I'd call the unit. They're like, oh, no, you're not coming here. And I'm like, well, I sound like an idiot, So I ended up getting hired at the resilience office. I had already gone in there and said, hey, this is what happened with me. I would like to tell my story. It's not very often that a senior NCO will talk about getting a DUI.
Yeah.
Or even a female will talk about getting a DUI. So for me, it was like, I have a problem. I know I'm not the only one that drinks like this. I know I'm not the only female that drinks like this. So for me, I kind of wanted to share my story so that way other people, if they were kind of, teetering and not sure, they would go get help.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a retired command chief of mine from Davis-Monthan. He's like my Air Force dad. I messaged him as soon as I got the DUI and was like, Chief, I need help. I don't know what to do. And he basically told me, you need to take this and turn it around. Like, you can do it. Like, accept it and own it. And he said, if this was your best friend, what would you tell your best friend? And why wouldn't you tell yourself the same thing? And I was like, I can't forgive myself. And that was one of the big things that he said, you need to forgive yourself. And I was like, I can't. Like, I could have killed someone. So it took me quite some time to kind of forgive myself for that. But yeah, once I did that and started kind of teaching resilience skills and really just kind of opening up myself and letting people know what I went through, because I feel like what I went through, so many people go through in the military. Like, divorces are so common in the military.
Yeah.
Usually, the situation that takes it from left to right is having a solid leader there that recognizes the problem and says, hey, let me pull you aside real quick. And then, you get the help you need.
Yeah.
It seems to me like you didn't really have that.
I didn't. So once I went into the resilience office and I had, my retired command chief, he was probably the biggest reason why I said, okay, I'm going to turn this around. And really, he kind of opened up to me because obviously I'd known him. He was my command chief. I really looked up to him. But he kind of opened himself up and told me some of the things he went through, when he was a young airman, and things that happened to him when he was a staff sergeant. Like, I had no idea that he had gone through. So him telling me, I was like, wow, like, and he was a command chief. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
You
Like,
just needed someone to believe in you.
Yeah,
And you found
for
it.
sure.
And two, when you look at therapy, just rephrasing the question like that, where you stop looking internally, say, hey, you have a friend that has the same situation, rephrase the question. Then you have an answer and you're like, because we oftentimes will give advice, but won't take the same advice that we dish out.
100%.
Yeah. So you recognized a great mentor, right?
sure.
You recognized a whole new route, new career path for you that you didn't really recognize. It's funny to look at adversity like that, in that, man, I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Sure.
But I think that it teed you up into a kind of a beautiful thing where you're going to be able to use that story as a platform to help other people who are dealing with the situation now. So I know that you have retirement on the horizon. What's next for you, and how are you going to activate that experience?
So obviously I got hired on as the veteran coordinator for the PTSD Foundation of America. And so our goal is to help veterans and their families. We have a peer-to-peer model. So it's to help veterans and their families that are struggling with PTSD. So I didn't talk about that, but obviously I have some PTSD.
little children's hands through the fence. Oh,
Yeah.
that's brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all these little things, they add up.
Yeah. I mean,
Even if we peel it back to the personal layer, say having a child that you raised since 5 to 13 was taken away from you, that's traumatic.
yeah. And I'll say, like, I don't blame my ex-husband, right? Like, I was drinking a lot. I was not who I am now, right? Like, but would I have just been like, you're done with my kid? No, probably not. But I understand, right? Like, we went our separate ways. I've done a lot of work on myself. And I've recognized that there are a lot of things that I probably could have done better. But yeah, being a mom and then I felt like I was nobody.
Yeah.
Like, had no identity. I'm
Big
like,
time.
what am I supposed to do now? I've been a mom, and that's been my primary thing for the last 7-8 years. So yeah, some PTSD from that. When I went in June last year, when I finally decided to go back in, say like, hey, I think I need some help. The ADAP technician that talked to me kind of was like, hey, let's talk through your history. Like, when did you first start? So I went through that whole process again, right? Like, when did you first start drinking? How bad was your drinking at this age? What have you been through in your life? And there's a specific event that happened while I was stationed in Korea that I never talked about. And I still, to this day, haven't really opened up too much about it. But it was military sexual trauma. And, like I said, I was raised like, it happened, acknowledge it, move on. And that's kind of how the military is, right? Military's like, this is what's happening, accept it. Now move on and complete the mission. Do what we need you to do. So I brought that up in my session, and, she was like, have you ever reported it? Like, no. And so that opened up a whole different door for me, because I was like, that was 17 years ago, like 15 years ago, whatever. Like, she's like, you can still report it. So that was different for me because, when I first joined the military, you didn't report those things. You didn't talk about those things. Like, people that were going through those kinds of things, like, it was like, oh, stay away from that person because you don't want to deal with the things that come along with that.
Yeah, they're ostracized.
So, you didn't say anything. So when I had that session, my tech was like, this is what we think. We think your primary issue is trauma and your secondary issue is alcohol. So we would like for you to check yourself into an institution and get some help. So I didn't want to, but I did. So I spent 30 days at an inpatient facility. And it was probably the best thing I ever did for myself.
Wow.
It was rough.
How was that experience?
Honestly, it was kind of like basic training, I'll be honest. Like, you couldn't have your phones. Like, you're on a set schedule every day.
Clanging trash cans in the
Yeah,
morning?
basically. But the program I went to was a military program. So you get to kind of choose what kind of program you want to go to. So
Okay.
they basically gave me like a list and said, these are the places you can go. What do you want to do? And I kind of just bounced off of them, like, what are your suggestions? And so I went to the facility that dealt with MSTs and with just trauma in general.
Okay.
And I was there it was not co-ed. We had a brother flight, basically.
Sure.
But it was very locked down. I couldn't have shoelaces. So it was pretty intense. I couldn't shave my legs without somebody watching me. So, it was a bit much, but it was very, they were very focused on getting you to dealing with what you had to deal with.
Sure.
Yeah.
My therapist would come in and he'd be like, how are you feeling today? And I'd be like, I'm fine. And he's like, fine is not an emotion. What emotion are you feeling? And I'm like, I don't know.
Pull out the
Like,
chart.
Yeah, basically that's what it
Map it
was.
out,
I was
yeah.
like, can I get the emotion chart,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah.
Because I never really dealt with emotions. Like, yeah, I would cry. I'd cry and I'd move on,
Yeah.
you know? So learning how to identify my emotions was extremely difficult for me.
How funny is that? It's something as simple, and now it's simple for you,
Yeah.
I'm sure, to be able to identify that. But when you look at that pie chart of emotions,
Oh
and it's
yeah, there's
got-
like 70 different emotions around
yeah,
it.
it's a huge wheel with 2 sections, and you're like, you look at it, you're like, oh, I know nothing about my
Yeah.
emotions the first time you look at that.
For sure.
And you're in your mid 30s at this
Oh
point.
yeah, I
Like,
mean I'm 38 now.
yeah,
so
we're like,
last year.
how do we not know this about
Yeah.
ourselves, right? It's so
Yeah, for
funny.
sure.
Just those little things.
Yep.
Most of the time, psychology is just about someone else explaining a definition of something that you already feel.
Yeah.
You know,
for
and
sure.
you just don't know how to define it. So that program had to be empowering for
Yeah.
you, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure.
But also, I think it's the steps that were necessary for you to build that foundation so you could share. I mean, some of these guys who lead some of the most amazing, AA meetings and, the drug addiction courses as well, they have a past. And you hear it at first and you're like, oh, my goodness, that's quite.
Yeah.
But look at what they've done with it. So it seems that a lot of these experiences led you up to what you're going to be doing now after the military service. So, one, we've heard a couple stories of how the rehab centers have not gone in the right direction for patients.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it went well for you and that it helped you recognize some of the issues that you were facing 17 years and just kind of stuffing it down with Brown, we always say.
Yeah.
But now, are you drinking now?
No.
Good
So
for you.
You're clear and free for how long?
So, just over a year.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And it's been hard.
Absolutely.
It, in the beginning, I was like, oh, I can do this. My friends were very supportive. It was coming back home and the transition. I haven't lived at home since I was 18. So I moved back in with my parents. My mom and I love her to death. She's the only mother I'm ever going to have. She's amazing. We just cannot live together.
That's
Makes
fair.
sense.
We just
That's fair.
cannot. We're very, very similar in a lot of ways. We're both very stubborn. So it was a struggle. My youngest sister is 27, and she's lived with my parents for the last 3 years, and she was across the hall from me at the house. And I'd go in there and I'd say, "You have a beer? Can I smell it?" And she'd be like, "You're cut off. Like, you're sober. Get away." And I'm like, "I just need to smell
Yeah.
it. Like,
Just a touch.
I don't want to drink, but I want to drink, but I don't." So like I've managed through all that.
Good for
Yeah.
you.
So June was a year. And so
And
now
lesson learned. Lesson
Yes.
learned
Yes.
that when you have one, you'll black out.
yeah. Yeah.
And
Not
no
ever going to
festivals.
do it again.
No festivals unless
Yeah,
it's a burger
yeah.
festival.
Yeah. And honestly, after that first, when I got my DUI, I didn't drive for a whole year. So there were lots of other things that happened along with that,
Yeah.
right? So I lost my license for a year. And then obviously it got reported back to the States. So I had stuff to deal with here. But I didn't drive for a year, and I would not get in a car with somebody if they had had anything to drink.
Smart.
I bought a breathalyzer, and I would make my friends blow in it before they leave my house if they were drinking. And then when I started driving again, if I had one drink, I would not drive. So I did learn a lesson.
Yeah.
You
The hard
know,
way.
even though I was still drinking, I was like, okay, well, I just won't drive. I won't do this. I won't do that.
Yeah.
And I thought I had good procedures in place.
Sure.
But I didn't, obviously.
Deeper-seated issues,
Yeah,
to
for
say
sure.
the least. So what is one thing you're looking forward to with your transition out of the military?
I don't know. There's so many possibilities. It's been so overwhelming. Honestly,
It's a whole new world.
it really is. I did move into my own place. I moved my youngest sister in with me. So we're sharing an apartment now. And now that my apartment is together, I'm finally calming down, but it's been a very stressful time. And, until I got this job, I was stressed out about not having a job. I was like, what am I going to do? What's next? I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And this job Honestly, it happened to find me. It was
Yeah.
crazy. The day before I found this job, I said, you know what? I'm not going to stress anymore. Like, if I get a job, I get a job. If not, I'll just go to school full
The
time.
moment you stop looking for it, huh?
Because I was
right up.
I had applied for so many jobs, anything and everything. I was like, I don't care what I do. I just want to have a job.
How funny is that? The day after,
Yeah,
you
the
found
day
the
after.
perfect fit.
Perfect fit.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for your journey to combat post-traumatic stress and help others that have experienced similar situations. I think that we need more people with powerful voices that can embrace their hardships, embrace the negative things that happen. I mean, like you said, a lot of people don't want to talk about it, especially a DUI, a blemish on their record, especially 20 years of
At
service.
17 and a half years, like I'd never been in trouble before.
Yeah, and to lose a stripe, I mean, something like that is traumatic all on its own. So thank you for, your resiliency and your ability to push through that so that you see the bigger picture, and that's to help the people around you. It's incredible.
Sure.
Fantastic. Do you have anything for the audience while we close out here? If you have one little tidbit of advice?
I would say to just be honest with your feelings and your emotions. It's hard, but it's going to come up eventually.
Yeah.
One way or another, it'll come out. So you may as well just start working on it.
Yeah, it will rear its head eventually.
Where can we find you at? Social media.
Social media,
your office. Like your office.
I have social media. I have Instagram.
You want to share it? You don't
I
have
will
to.
share it.
You're going to get a lot of
It's
requests.
fine. It is Manda_JV_MTZ.
If you're having issues with mental health, I mean, military sexual trauma, please reach out
Yes,
with any questions,
absolutely.
I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%.
It's always great to find people that have gone through those similar experiences that you have and just connect.
Yes, absolutely.
Find your
Always.
mentor.
Well, thanks for your time today, Amanda.
Thanks, guys.
This has been the Medevac Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this week. Keep an eye out for next week. There's an episode every Thursday. We will see you guys then.
See you next time.